Not everything in the freezer aisle is actually ice cream. Some of it is legally classified as frozen dairy dessert because it does not meet the requirements to carry the name. In the United States, anything labeled ice cream must contain at least 10% milk fat and weigh no less than 4.5 pounds per gallon. That weight rule exists because of air. The more air a manufacturer pumps in during churning, the lighter and fluffier the product becomes, and at some point, it stops qualifying. Nearly every difference between every frozen dessert in the world comes down to three things: how much fat, how much air, and what temperature it is served at. These are the rules that separate everything that follows. Gelato. Walk into a gelateria in Florence, and the first thing you will notice is that the flavors look different. A pistachio gelato is a muted olive green, not bright neon. That is your first clue that something about the recipe is fundamentally different from American ice cream. Gelato uses more milk than cream, typically containing around 4 to 8% fat compared to ice cream's 10 to 18%. It is also churned much more slowly, which means far less air gets folded in, roughly 20 to 30% overrun versus the 50 to 100% found in American ice cream. For context, 100% overrun means half of what is in the container is air. Economy grocery brands often push close to that ceiling, which is one reason a pint of premium ice cream feels heavier than a pint of the cheap stuff. Gelato sits at the opposite end of that scale, and it is served warmer at about -12 degrees Celsius compared to -18. That might not sound like it matters, but it changes everything. Fat coats the tongue and mutes flavor, so less fat means the actual ingredients come through more clearly. Warmer temperatures release more aroma compounds, which the nose picks up while you eat. The result is a pistachio gelato that genuinely tastes like pistachios. The origins trace back to Renaissance Italy, where Bernardo Buontalenti is traditionally credited with creating an early version for the Medici court in Florence during the late 1500s. One detail worth knowing: if you see gelato piled high in dramatic mounds under bright lights, that is often a sign of excess stabilizers and artificial coloring. Authentic Italian gelato is stored flat in covered metal tubs and served with a flat spade, not a round scoop. And because gelato has less fat and less air, both of which act as insulation, it melts noticeably faster than American ice cream. That is not a flaw. It is the trade-off for all that extra flavor. Gelato strips the fat to let flavor through, but the next frozen dessert strips the dairy entirely. Sorbet is one of the oldest frozen treats in the world, and its name traces back thousands of years. The word comes from the French sorbet, which came from the Italian sorbetto, which traces further back to the Arabic word shariba, meaning to drink, and ultimately to the Persian sharbat. Persians were mixing snow with fruit juices, rosewater, and saffron as far back as 550 BCE, storing ice year-round in massive underground chambers called yakhchals. There is a popular story that Emperor Nero of Rome sent runners into the mountains specifically to haul back snow for mixing with fruit and honey. Antonio Latini, a chef in Naples, recorded some of the first written sorbetto recipes in the 1690s, and is also credited with an early milk-based version, which may have been one of the stepping stones toward modern ice cream. Today, sorbet is straightforward: fruit, sugar, water, and nothing else. No dairy, no eggs, almost no air churned in. The texture is icier and more crystalline than anything with cream, and the fruit flavor is intense and direct. Now, here is a distinction that confuses almost everyone. Sherbet is not the same thing as sorbet. Under US law, sherbet must contain 1 to 2% milk fat. That small amount of dairy makes it slightly creamier and paler than sorbet, but still far lighter than ice cream. And the common spelling sherbet with a second R is just a widespread misspelling, not a separate product. Both words trace back to the same Persian root. Sorbet goes back millennia, but in 20th century America, a whole new category of frozen treat emerged from a series of small accidents. Soft serve owes its existence to a flat tire. In 1934, a Greek immigrant named Tom Carvel was driving his ice cream truck through Hartsdale, New York over Memorial Day weekend when he got a puncture. He pulled over and started selling the softening ice cream from the side of the road, and to his surprise, people loved the texture. Within 2 years, he had opened his first permanent store. But there is a competing claim. In 1938, J.F. McCullough and his son Alex in Illinois developed their own soft-serve formula and tested it at a friend's ice cream shop. They reportedly sold about 1,600 servings in 2 hours. That led to the first Dairy Queen opening in Joliet, Illinois, in 1940. Now, you may have heard that Margaret Thatcher invented soft serve while working as a chemist at the J. Lyons Company in England. She did work there in the late 1940s on emulsifiers and aeration for ice cream products. But soft serve already existed in America for over a decade before she started. Even her official obituary repeated the claim, which is exactly how myths become facts. What actually makes soft serve different is the machine. It simultaneously freezes and aerates the mix, dispensing it at about -6 degrees Celsius, which is significantly warmer than hard ice cream. That warmer temperature is why it feels smoother on the tongue. The overrun in soft serve typically sits around 35 to 45%, which is higher than gelato but lower than most hard ice cream from a factory. Emulsifiers developed in the 1940s and 1950s gave soft serve the smooth, pushable consistency that sets it apart from regular ice cream that has simply been left out too long. Soft serve gets its texture from temperature and air, but there is a version born on the Coney Island boardwalk that adds one critical ingredient. Frozen custard was invented in 1919 by brothers Archie and Elton Core, dairymen from York, Pennsylvania, who were selling ice cream near the ocean. The salt air and summer heat kept melting their product too fast, so they started adding egg yolks to the mix. The result was denser, silkier, and held up better in the heat. It was a sensation. By some accounts, they sold over 18,000 cones on their first weekend. Under U.S. law, frozen custard must contain the same 10% milk fat as ice cream, plus at least 1.4% egg yolk solids. If your ice cream has that much egg yolk in it, it legally cannot be called ice cream anymore. It becomes frozen custard. The 1933 Chicago World's Fair introduced it to the Midwest, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin became the unofficial frozen custard capital of the country. To this day, 3 competing stands in Milwaukee, including Kopp's, Leon's, and Gilles, have maintained a rivalry that goes back decades. Each one serves it fresh in small batches throughout the day, which is part of what gives it that dense, creamy quality that scooped ice cream from a factory line cannot quite replicate. Frozen custard added eggs to the formula, but halfway around the world, India's answer to frozen desserts takes a completely different approach. Kulfi is ice cream with no churning at all. Zero air gets folded in, which makes it noticeably denser and heavier than anything in a Western freezer aisle. The technique originated in 16th century Delhi during the Mughal Empire, and it is recorded in the Ain-i-Akbari, a detailed account of Emperor Akbar's court. Mughal cooks would slowly reduce sweetened milk for hours until it became thick and concentrated, then flavor it with pistachios, cardamom, or saffron, and freeze it in metal cones packed in a slurry of ice and saltpeter. The word kulfi itself comes from the Persian word kulfi, meaning covered cup. Because the milk is cooked down so far before freezing, kulfi has a caramelized richness that regular ice cream does not achieve. And because there is no air whipped in, it melts much more slowly, which is why street vendors called kulfi wallahs can sell it from pushcarts in the Indian summer heat without it turning into a puddle in seconds. Classic kulfi flavors include malai, which is pure cream, along with pistachio, cardamom, saffron, mango, and rose. Traditionally, it is frozen in small conical metal molds and served on a stick or sliced from the mold directly onto a plate. Kulfi is dense because it contains no air, but the next frozen treat resists melting for a completely different reason. Turkish ice cream, called dondurma, stretches like taffy and can be eaten with a knife and fork. The secret is 2 unusual ingredients that have nothing to do with dairy. The first is salep, a flour ground from the tubers of wild orchids that grow in the mountains of southern Turkey. Salep acts as a natural thickener and gives dondurma its signature chewiness and resistance to melting. The second is mastic, a plant resin that adds an additional layer of elasticity and a faint piney aroma. The tradition is rooted in the Kahramanmaraş region, where it has been made for roughly 300 years, often with goat's milk. If you have seen videos of Turkish ice cream vendors spinning cones on long metal paddles, flipping them upside down, and teasing customers by pulling the cone away just as they reach for it, those tricks only work because the ice cream is stiff enough to hold its shape through all of it. There is a serious side to the story, too. Wild orchids used for salep have never been commercially cultivated, and the demand became so intense that Turkey eventually banned salep exports to protect the remaining orchid populations. Vendors outside of Turkey now typically use substitutes like guar gum, which gets close but never quite replicates the real thing. Durma stretches like no other frozen dessert, but the next one wraps itself in something you would never expect to find around ice cream. Mochi ice cream looks Japanese, and the concept of wrapping things in pounded rice dough is ancient in Japan. But the frozen dessert that most of the world now recognizes as mochi ice cream was actually invented in Los Angeles. Frances Hashimoto, a Japanese-American businesswoman whose family ran a confectionery called Mikawaya in Little Tokyo, worked with her husband Joel Friedman to develop the product in the early 1990s. Friedman had fallen in love with daifuku, a traditional Japanese rice cake treat, on a trip to Japan and wanted to put ice cream inside it. The technical challenge was enormous. Mochi dough is made hot, and ice cream obviously needs to stay frozen, so they had to figure out how to work both at a temperature where neither fell apart. Mikawaya launched it around 1993, testing first in Hawaii with flavors like mango, red bean, and green tea. Japan's Lotte had released a mochi-wrapped frozen treat called Yukimi Daifuku back in 1981, so the concept existed there earlier. But it was the Mikawaya product that conquered American grocery freezers and spread globally. Hashimoto went on to receive Japan's Order of the Rising Sun for her contributions to Japanese-American cultural life in Little Tokyo. After she passed away in 2012, a private equity firm bought the brand and relaunched it as Mochi, now sold in tens of thousands of stores worldwide. The product itself remains deceptively simple-looking, a small round ball you can eat in 3 bites. But the manufacturing requires precise temperature management at every stage, because mochi dough and ice cream want to exist at completely opposite temperatures. Mochi ice cream took over the freezer aisle, but the most photogenic frozen dessert in the world came from the streets of Bangkok. Rolled ice cream, known in Thailand as itim pad, which roughly translates to stir-fried ice cream, emerged as a Thai street food around 2009. A liquid base is poured onto a flat metal surface, chilled to roughly -30 degrees Celsius. The vendor chops, mixes, and spreads it thin with whatever toppings the customer wants folded in, and as the mixture flash freezes on contact, they scrape it into tight curls with a flat spatula and stand the rolls upright in a cup. The entire process takes about 2 minutes, and watching it happen is half the appeal. That visual is exactly what made it explode. Between 2015 and 2017, Instagram videos and YouTube clips of the mesmerizing preparation process went massively viral. Shops opened in cities worldwide, often drawing hour-long lines. Because no air gets churned in, the texture is dense and creamy, closer to kulfi than soft serve. One YouTube channel dedicated entirely to filming the process, run by a man who discovered rolled ice cream on a trip to Thailand in 2015. Built a massive following by filming nothing but his gloved hands scraping ice cream on a cold plate. In New York City, a shop called 10 Below in Chinatown drew hour-long lines when it opened. The spectacle is the product. Rolled ice cream went viral because of how it looks, but the last frozen dessert on this list went mainstream because of how healthy it claims to be. Frozen yogurt first appeared commercially in the United States in the early 1970s, when a company called H.P. Hood introduced a soft-serve product they branded Frogurt. Early versions were genuinely tart and did not sell particularly well. The real breakthrough came in 1981, when Frank Hickinbotham opened the first Teacaby in Little Rock, Arkansas. The name originally stood for "This Can't Be Yogurt," but a lawsuit from a competitor forced them to change it to "The Country's Best Yogurt." TCB rode the low-fat health craze of the 1980s hard and grew to roughly 1,600 locations by 1990. Then the trend faded. Frozen yogurt nearly disappeared from the American landscape until Pinkberry opened in West Hollywood in 2005, and sparked a second wave. Pinkberry brought a tart, tangy flavor profile and introduced the self-serve toppings bar model that brands like Yogurtland, Red Mango, and Menchie's would copy across the country. Lines at the original Pinkberry were reportedly so long that the city earned an estimated $175,000 in parking tickets in a single month. At its peak in the mid-1990s, frozen yogurt production in the United States hit over 150 million gallons a year before dropping to roughly 60 million by 2007, right before Pinkberry reignited the whole category. The actual difference between frozen yogurt and ice cream is simpler than it sounds. Frozen yogurt is made from cultured yogurt instead of cream, which typically means less fat. But the sugar content is often just as high or higher to offset the tartness, which is the detail that healthy frozen yogurt marketing quietly leaves out. Every frozen dessert in this video traces back to the same basic idea. Take something cold, make it taste extraordinary, and figure out how to keep it from melting before someone finishes eating it. The Persians solved it with underground ice chambers. The Mughals solved it by skipping the air entirely. The Turks solved it with wild orchid flower, and a guy with a flat tire in New York solved it by accident. New Zealanders eat more ice cream per person than any other country on Earth, roughly 28 liters per capita per year. Their signature flavor is called Hokey Pokey, vanilla with chunks of honeycomb toffee, and it has been a national staple since the 1950s. The freezer aisle is a lot more interesting than it looks.